the most significant risks associated with grain storage is a worker becoming entrapped or engulfed in grain. Workers become entrapped or engulfed when they get caught in a flowing grain, they fall through crusted grain that has formed a bridge over an empty space or cavity underneath it, or grain that is caked in a large mass collapses, resulting in an avalanche. Entrapment in grain takes only seconds. An unprotected worker often doesn't have time to react. Over half of entrapment engulfment situations result in death. It is highly critical anyone entering a grain bin or other grain storage facility be protected from incidents of entrapment or engulfment. One effective method of protection is the use of a body harness and lifeline system. Entering a grain bin should be avoided. However, when it is determined that a worker must enter a grain bin, it is vitally important the person entering a bin wears a full body harness that is attached to a properly installed lifeline to protect the worker from being entrapped in grain. Most grain bins being used today do not have a lifeline protection system. This video will describe a relatively easy and low-cost method to establish and use a lifeline system in a grain bin. This includes the necessary components and the procedure used by the person entering the bin and the person or persons assisting the entrant. A lifeline protection system consists of a full body harness, a knot-passing pulley, lifeline rope, sidewall anchor, sling, carabiners, and a belay device. Establishing and using a lifeline in a grain bin is only one major step of following safe entry procedures. This video does not address the pre-planning necessary before entering a bin, such as a bin entry checklist or the permit process when required. Nor does the video address emergency preparation or response to an entrapment. Taking the time to understand the preventive, safe practice of lifeline use during bin entry and investing in the relatively low cost of purchasing and installing a lifeline system in bins will protect our farms and grain elevators' most valuable resource, our workers.
There is a variety of equipment needed for a lifeline protection system. These include a full body harness, a 7/16 or 1/2 inch diameter rope that is low stretch and nylon kermantle. This rope is available in various lengths. Slings or sewn loops used to attach the lifeline system to an anchor point. 1-inch tubular webbing tied with a water knot used for anchoring. A water knot is the only knot to use with webbing. A Y lanyard used to hook onto the back of the full body harness and then onto 2 anchor points. A Y lanyard is for personal fall protection if needed for the observer. It is not used in this video because the platform has a good handrail from the bin manufacturer. A knot-passing pulley installed at the inside peak of the bin. The pulley is large enough to allow the lifeline rope system, including its knots and carabiners, to pass through it. Anchoring the knot-passing pulley to the peak of the bin will depend on the type of bin you have. Consult the bin manufacturer or a qualified engineer for specific information regarding installation of the knot-passing pulley for your bins. A belay device attached to the rope and the sidewall anchor. The belay device controls the lifeline rope at the top entry point and is managed by the observer. Its use will be demonstrated later in the video. There are many belay devices to choose from. Make sure the belay device you choose is used according to the manufacturer's recommendations. Carabiners are metal loops that have spring-loaded gates that lock and securely attach ropes and other devices in the lifeline protection system. A sidewall anchor point secures the lifeline to the grain bin. There are a number of effective sidewall anchor point installation options. Remember, a ladder or ladder brackets are never adequate to use for an anchor. The first anchor point on this demonstration display is a piece of angle iron bolted to a splice of bin sheets with a sling worked around it and attached by a carabiner. Anchor points can be attached to bin stiffeners. A sling or webbing and carabiner can then be worked around an inside stiffener and attached by a carabiner. This plate anchor point is bolted on the high side of the corrugation. The outside looks exactly the same as the inside. A carabiner and sling are used to attach the lifeline. This eye bolt anchor point is a 6-inch length of 2-inch pipe that fits in the corrugation on the outside of the bin, while the eye of the eye bolt is inside the bin. The inside view of the eye bolt shows a carabiner that attaches to the eye bolt and the lifeline. A rescue kit is needed in case of an emergency when entering a bin. This kit is a combination of hardware, tools, rope equipment, and first aid items that might be used in an emergency. Most importantly, the rescue kit should include multiple copies of an emergency action plan that is unique for each storage facility. This plan should document important procedures, and it should also include the emergency contact information for first responders. Thorough preparation is the key to a successful lifeline protection system. First, you want to properly equip yourself with a full-body harness. Make sure the harness you use is put on and used according to the manufacturer's recommendations. You also want to know 2 knots. A figure-8 knot is being used to place a loop or bight in the end of a lifeline to attach the harness. An alternative to this knot is to use a rope with a manufactured loop in the end. A water knot tied into 1-inch tubular webbing. A water knot is the only acceptable knot to use with webbing. An alternative to using a water knot is to buy and use manufactured sewn slings. It's also helpful to have thorough on-the-ground communication with team members before going inside the bin to determine that all pre-entry procedures have been completed and all team members know their roles and responsibilities. Has a bin entry permit been completed? Are there any pre-existing hazards in the bin? What's the current atmosphere and aeration in the bin? Has the equipment been locked out and tagged out according to company policy? Does everyone know their role in the lifeline protection system? Who is the entrant? Who is the observer? If an emergency occurs, who will initiate the action plan? What is each person's role during an emergency? Once you complete your pre-entry preparation, you are ready to enter the grain bin to install and use the Lifeline system. Proper bin entry requires at least 2 people, the entrant and observer. In this 2-person Lifeline protection system, the observer and the bin entrant get to the platform outside the bin entry door by way of ladders, stairs, and catwalks. Because of the height involved, fall protection is required on ladders, stairs, catwalks, and the platform. In this case, the fall protection is a work platform with handrails. A gate is needed for the entry portion of the platform to protect workers from falls while on the platform. One type of gate is a chain gate, as illustrated here. In some cases, a harness and other personal fall protection equipment, such as the Y lanyard, may be needed. The observer or the bin entrant will reach inside the top bin door and use a carabiner to attach the figure-8 knot on the end of the lifeline to the clothesline. The clothesline, as well as the knot-passing pulley, has been previously installed. At this demonstration bin, the clothesline is a long loop of rope that starts at the entry door and goes through the knot-passing pulley and back to the bin wall with the ends tied together to form the long loop. The figure-8 knot end of the lifeline is pulled to the peak of the bin by the clothesline, through the knot-passing pulley, and back to the entry door. The lifeline, including knots, carabiners, and figure-8 knot, are pulled through the knot-passing pulley and back to the entry door. This was done in a demonstration bin in order to show more detail. After the figure-8 knot has been installed through the knot-passing pulley and is looped back to the bin door, it is then unclipped from the clothesline and attached to the D-ring on the front or back of the bin entrance harness with the same carabiner used on the clothesline. The clothesline is not a part of the lifeline and is no longer needed after the lifeline is installed through the knot-passing pulley. Next, the observer attaches the lifeline to the belay device. The belay device is connected to the grain bin wall anchor using 2 carabiners and a manufactured sling. Again, a ladder or ladder brackets are never adequate to use as an anchor. The entrant can now go into the bin with one end of the lifeline attached to his D-ring and the lifeline inserted into the belay device. As soon as the entrant is inside the door, the observer will belay the entrant by reaching through the open bin door and managing the rope with the belay device. The belay device will grab the rope without any action from the observer if the entrant falls or even with a sudden jerk on the lifeline. On the grain surface, the entrant will use an angle finder and check the angle of repose of the grain. The angle of repose should be between 19 and 25 degrees for dry grain. If the angle is acceptable and there are no other observed hazards in the bin, the entrant can begin to walk on the grain surface and move away from the entry door ladder. There are vertical temperature cables in this grain bin to monitor grain temperature. These cables are not a part of the Lifeline system. Meanwhile, the observer is keeping slack in the Lifeline to a minimum, 1 to 2 feet. Slack is minimized to limit the force of a fall should the entrant fall through crusted grain. It will also limit how far an entrant will travel downward to prevent the entrant from being pulled into grain and becoming engulfed above their waist. Both the entrant and the observer are verbally communicating whether more or less rope is needed to move around. The observer is also watching the entrant and able to hold the entrant at any time, for any reason, and as long as necessary, because the knot-passing pulley and anchors are absorbing the weight and the belay device grabs the Lifeline. At this point, the entrant can move around the bin, checking the grain's condition. If the grain is in good condition, it should be loose as he walks and moves with him as he walks down the slope. The grain will not move much if the angle of repose is correct. As the entrant walks to the center of the bin, the observer continues to keep a minimum amount of slack in the Lifeline. As the entrant moves down the slope, he will need more slack in the Lifeline. The entrant should say, "Take some slack," to the observer if he has too much slack. He may need to ask for slack if the rope is so tight he can't move around. The observer is watching the entrant at all times. He will probably need to have his head, arms, and shoulders in the bin door to observe the entrant and manage the belay device to control the Lifeline. If the observer cannot see the entrant, they should be in constant voice contact. Back on the grain surface, the entrant can walk up the grain slope to the entry door. A tag line would be useful to help a tired entrant make it back up the slope, but it's not required. As shown, a Lifeline protection system consists of 7 components: a full-body harness, knot-passing pulley, Lifeline rope, sidewall anchor, sling, carabiners, and belay device. 2 of these components, the knot-passing pulley and the sidewall anchor, are permanently installed to always be ready to accept a Lifeline for bin entry. Whenever bin entry is required, it is simply a matter of a few minutes to put the Lifeline through the knot-passing pulley and attach it to the sidewall anchor. Those few minutes could save your life. Do not attempt to install or use a Lifeline without adequate and appropriate training. The persons featured in the video are highly trained and skilled professionals with many years of experience with ropes, harnesses, belay devices, and the other equipment shown, as well as years of grain bin entry experience. The equipment mentioned in this video should always be used according to the manufacturer's recommendations.
The crops farmers plant, harvest, and store are the lifeblood of the agricultural industry. But mishandling that grain can have fatal consequences for farm families and agricultural businesses. Implementing a Lifeline protection system for people working in your grain bins is an economical way to ensure the safety of the priceless lives involved in the successful operation of your farm or business. The grain you produce has great value, but nothing is more valuable than the lives of family members, co-workers, and employees. A Lifeline protection system is a proven method to protect those lives and send them home safe to their families.